I feel like things are getting unsubtle. Things are getting very blunt, very fast. In the first week of April, on April 3rd, the Washington Post broke this very strange story. 4 great Washington Post reporters bylined on the story. You could tell it was sourced to the hilt. They got U.S. officials, officials in European countries, officials in Arab countries, all confirming this strange thing, all confirming that on January 11th and January 12th this year, which was less than a week after the intelligence community put out its damning report about Russia's attack on our presidential election last year, less than a week after that report came out, there was a 2-day-long meeting that was held in the Seychelles Islands, which is off the coast of Kenya, out by Madagascar. And it was a meeting in the Seychelles, 2 days worth of meetings between a representative for Vladimir Putin and an envoy from the Trump administration. According to the Post, again, this reporting first week of April, Erik Prince maintained at the time of that meeting that he was authorized to act as an unofficial surrogate for the president-elect. His hosts at that meeting believed that to be true about him. He got that meeting and he spent 2 days in January in an island paradise meeting with a representative for Vladimir Putin. What did they meet about? What did they talk about? What took 2 days to get through? Why did they have to meet in this faraway place? Who knows? Presumably they had many matters of mutual concern to discuss. But here's the detail of this that carried forward to today. The person who set up that mysterious meeting in the Seychelles Islands in January, the person who set up what has basically been reported out as a back-channel meeting between the Trump folks and the Putin folks, the guy who set it up, the guy who hosted the meeting, was this man. MBZ. They call him MBZ because it's easy to remember. His name is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. He's the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of United Arab Emirates. So he's next in line to the throne in the United Arab Emirates. Now, the Washington Post reports and pictures confirm that MBZ met multiple times with Vladimir Putin personally last year. They further report that MBZ mysteriously flew into the United States in December without notifying the Obama administration. Now, that's weird because national leaders like the Crown Prince of a U.S. ally would usually notify the U.S. government when they were coming into this country for any reason. But in December, he flew into New York without telling the Obama administration, without telling the U.S. government that he was coming. They later figured out that he was here because his name turned up on a flight manifest. But other than that, they'd had no notification. Turns out what he was coming to New York for in December was to take a meeting with Mike Flynn, Steve Bannon, and Jared Kushner. He met with them in December, and then the following month, in January, he set up and then hosted these 2 days of meetings between Erik Prince, who said he was there on behalf of Donald Trump, and a Russian emissary who was there on behalf of Vladimir Putin. That was the host and the organizer of that meeting, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, better known as MBZ. Guess where MBZ turned up today?
Great honor to have Sheikh Mohammed with us today, a man that I've known, very special person, highly respected, and loves his country. I can tell you that, loves his country. And I think loves the United States, which to us is very important. Thank you very much for coming. My honor to be here. Thank you, sir.
How was the process for selecting you as the FBI director?
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. It's very good.
Thank you, President.
Moving rapidly.
Yeah, boy, howdy, are things moving rapidly. The Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi has a very specific role in the Trump-Russia story. To the extent we know about any back-channel meetings after the election between the Trump side and the Putin side, it was organized by and hosted by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. And there he is, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, randomly in the Oval Office today. Okay, hi. While the president answers questions about firing the FBI director who was leading the investigation into his connections to Russia. You know, the day after he fired the FBI director who was leading the investigation into Trump and Russia, the day after that firing, the administration welcomed to Washington the Russian foreign minister. So he could throw the firing of the FBI director in the faces of American reporters with a sneer.
Well, welcome to the state. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to welcome Foreign Minister Lavrov to the State Department and express my appreciation for him making the trip to Washington so that we could continue our dialogue and our exchange of views that began in Moscow with the dialogue he hosted on a very broad range of topics. Thank you.
Does the Comey firing cast a shadow over your talks, gentlemen?
Was he fired?
The U.S. supports yes.
You are kidding. You are kidding.
Fired. What about
That same day, the Russian foreign minister turned up in the Oval Office as well. U.S. reporters and photographers were not allowed any access to that meeting. We got these photos of that meeting because the Russian foreign minister brought with him a photographer from a Russian state-run news service. That's how we found out that they did let a photographer in there, just not an American one. That's also how we found out that the Russian ambassador was in on that meeting too. You know, the White House hadn't said anything about that. This is the same Russian ambassador who Michael Flynn concealed his meetings with, and who Jeff Sessions concealed his meetings with, and who Jared Kushner concealed his meetings with. I'm not sure we would have known that the president was meeting with him too last week, but the Russian state-run news agency photographer let loose in the Oval Office while American reporters and photographers were banned. That guy ended up confirming the news. Oh, hey, look, the ambassador's there too. The White House later explained the presence of that Russian photographer in the Oval Office by saying this, quote, "They tricked us." We didn't know they were bringing a photographer. Former National Security Council official Colin Kahl followed up with this, quote, "Deadly serious question. Was it a good idea to let a Russian government photographer and all their equipment into the Oval Office?" Former Deputy Director of the CIA responded with this, "No. No, it was not a good idea." But they did it anyway, for some reason. And that was one day after Trump fired the FBI director who was leading the investigation into the Trump-Russia question. And that is unsubtle enough. But then we learned the very unusual origin of why that meeting happened. We learned who asked for the president to let those Russian officials into the Oval Office. We learned who asked for that personally.
When I spoke with Putin, he asked me whether or not I would see Lavrov. Now, should I say, no, I'm not going to see him? I said, I will see him.
Just put this together for a second. This is not like about the campaign and like, you know, Carter Page in Moscow in July and the Republican convention and what was going on. Man, like, no, like, it's now mid-May, right? On April 30th, like this is happening now. On April 30th, Trump goes on CBS and reverts to his old line that maybe Russia didn't hack the election. Could have been China, could have been anyone, I'm not so sure. 2 days after that, he has a personal call with Vladimir Putin. Putin, he says, asks him directly, hey, I want you to bring Lavrov and Kislyak into the Oval Office. Answer apparently is, sir, yes, sir, no problem, sir. Then the following Monday, we get Sally Yates's dramatic, damning testimony about Trump's national security advisor, Mike Flynn, being compromised by the Russians and his unexplained and surreptitious contacts with Russian government officials. The day after that, the president fires the FBI director, who was leading the investigation into possible connections between the Trump campaign and Russia during the Russian attack. The day after that, he hosts those Russian officials in the Oval Office. Now today, after his Oval Office meeting at lunchtime with a guy who hosted the 2 days of meetings between emissaries for Trump and Putin in January, now today, the Washington Post breaks this. Trump revealed highly classified information to Russian foreign minister and ambassador. The story broken this afternoon by Washington Post reporters Greg Miller and Greg Jaffe. It was then subsequently confirmed by BuzzFeed News and then also by the New York Times, citing not only former U.S. officials, but current U.S. officials, which seems important. The Post says this, quote, President Trump revealed highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister and ambassador in a White House meeting last week. The information the president relayed had been provided by a U.S. partner through an intelligence sharing arrangement considered so sensitive that details have been withheld from allies and tightly restricted even within the U.S. government. Quote, this is code word information, said a U.S. official familiar with the matter, using terminology that refers to one of the highest classification levels used by American spy agencies. Trump, quote, revealed more information to the Russian ambassador than we have shared with our own allies. The partner had not given the United States permission, meaning the partner country, partner nation that obtained this information. That country had not given the United States permission to share the material with Russia. And officials say Trump's decision to do so endangers cooperation from an ally that has access to the inner workings of the Islamic State. After Trump's meeting, senior White House officials took steps to contain the damage. Senior White House officials appeared to recognize quickly that Trump had overstepped and moved to contain the potential fallout. Thomas P. Bossert, Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, placed calls to the directors of the CIA and the NSA, which are the services most directly involved in the intelligence sharing arrangement with the partner. Quote, one of Bossert's subordinates also called for the problematic portion of Trump's discussion to be stricken from internal memos and for the full transcript to be limited to a small circle of recipients. All efforts to prevent sensitive details from being disseminated further or leaked. Well, we know about it now. Now, the Washington Post tonight has been very careful to not describe the information that Trump described, to not describe exactly what information Trump leaked. They make clear in their reporting that they know that information, but they've been very careful about what they've published. Basically, the implication here is that they are trying to not compound the damage that he is reported to have already done by giving this information to the Russians. And the White House tonight is furiously calling the reporting false, although it should be noted they are not specifically rebutting the Post's actual reporting, which is that the president described to these Russian officials something that was only known because of another country doing very sensitive intelligence operations that the United States was not supposed to disclose to the Russians. Why did he tell them that? This is going over exactly how you would expect it to go over in Washington. We've even had a peep from a Republican, the Republican chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Corker, saying tonight, quote, the chaos that is being created by the lack of discipline is creating an environment that I think creates a worrisome environment. He says, quote, obviously they are in a downward spiral right now and have got to figure out a way to come to grips with all that is happening. A downward spiral. We do not actually know what this spirals down to. We do not know what is at the bottom of this. I'll say anecdotally, just discussing this news with people, just people in my life, this is one of the first stories that's come out where people have responded to this news by telling me they feel afraid about what's going to happen next. In February this year, the Wall Street Journal reported that U.S. intelligence officials were withholding sensitive intelligence information from President Trump because they were concerned it could be leaked or compromised if they told it to him. That was incredibly controversial reporting at the time it came out in February, almost unbelievable at the time. Right, the administration said at the time that there was absolutely no way that was happening. And I, of course, don't know whether or not U.S. spies were keeping intelligence from Trump because of leak concerns as far back as February. But if tonight's bombshell from the Washington Post is correct, it seems clear that any such concerns would have been very well founded. Joining us now is one of the Washington Post reporters who broke this story tonight, Greg Jaffe. Mr. Jaffe, congratulations on this scoop. Thanks for being here to help us understand it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Obviously, I'm not going to ask you to talk about your sources, but can you tell us a little bit about when you started chasing this story down? How long after the president's meeting with these Russian officials did the work on this story start?
You know, not that much long after, because the meeting wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
But no, we had been working on it for the last several days.
What is code word information. You cite a U.S. official familiar with the matter saying that this is code word information. And from the placement of that in your article and the way you describe it, it's clear that that's supposed to indicate to us that this is very highly protected information. But for us laymen, just observers trying to figure this out, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's right. So very highly protected information that we don't distribute to allies, that is even restricted within the U.S. government. And this information this intelligence came from an ally, and that made it additionally sensitive because they had certain expectations that we would safeguard it, which we didn't deliver on in this particular case.
In terms of those decisions, how did you, as a news organization, how did you make the decision as to what was, where the line was for what was too sensitive to publish? Was it hard to figure out what you could say about this without compounding the problem of what the president did?
You know, I think that's a decision. It's a decision either fortunately or unfortunately that the Post has had a lot of experience with over the last decade or so. Going back to the Snowden disclosures and other things. So it's something that happens in collaboration with the government as well. So we don't just we don't just gather this information, throw it into the news, throw it up online, and then contact the government. So there were ongoing conversations over the course of today about what would compromise information, what needed to be held back. So we held back information about the precise nature of the threat, some of the precise nature of the intelligence and how it was gathered, and the city involved.
I noted in your sourcing on this that it was, you mentioned both former officials and current officials as sources for this information. Is it fair for us to read into that there are people who are serving in government now, either in the agencies or in the administration itself, who themselves are concerned about this, about what happened here, even though we've got the White House tonight sort of forcefully calling the story false?
Yeah, no, there were a lot of people who were concerned and I think alarmed by the lack of care with regard to classified information. In terms of not sticking to talking points, in terms of just kind of winging it once you get into the Oval Office. And I think that was the nature of the concern that propelled folks to come forward and
the National Security,
talk.
The National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, tonight said that the story is false, and his elaboration on that was that the president didn't disclose any sources and methods. Can you just, I wonder if you could just respond to that.
Yeah. So the story, I think, to be clear, doesn't say that the president disclosed sources and methods. What he disclosed was information about the intelligence that we'd gathered, or that had been gathered by one of our partners, with enough detail both about the plot, the location of where it was happening, and other things that, you know, a smart ally or a smart adversary with a sophisticated intelligence service could sort of reverse engineer and figure out where it was coming from and how it was collected potentially. And so that was the nature of the concern. And the Russians certainly have a capable intelligence service.
And so just to be dumb about this on purpose, just to bottom line this, right. The concern here is that by having told the Russians about ISIS-related information that was obtained in a specific city, which the president actually named, the Russians, from that disclosure, could conceivably discern who operating in that city was able to get access to ISIS-related information, and the Russians conceivably could want to disrupt that, could want to expose that, could use that for their own strategic purposes. It's essentially exposed the people who gathered that very sensitive information to Russia, knowing that they're doing it when Russia previously didn't know they were doing it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Both the information about where and then the nature of the plotting that was going on is potentially troublesome. That's exactly right. And, you know, in some cases in Syria, our interests overlap with the Russians, particularly with regard to ISIS. In other instances, they diverge. And so that's part of the reason we hold stuff back from them.
Greg Jaffe, one of the Washington Post reporters who broke this bombshell of a story tonight. I know this is a very busy time for you. I really appreciate you helping us understand your reporting.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Congratulations. All right, so It was, we crossed a Rubicon, right? When we became the first, when this became the first presidency to have the president under counterintelligence investigation while serving as the president. He then fired the FBI director investigating him. We now have information that he thereafter, immediately thereafter, the day after, hosted Russian officials in the Oval Office and gave them incredibly sensitive and damaging intelligence information that they were not entitled to have. And he hosted them in the Oval Office at the express personal request of Vladimir Putin, which he says he didn't feel like he could say no to. Hyperbole is dead. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.